We're deeply involved in creation of Aadhaar, creation of UPI, lot of work on just building a deep tech ecosystem.
We have not talked about this publicly.
Who am I? What I'm here for? What is going to be my impact in this world?
Where do I find happiness? I should actually be helping create an ecosystem that will allow entrepreneurs to thrive.
That a lot of people have this genuine desire to give back. They want to be part of this whole Viksit Bharat story and see India do well on global stage. But there are lots of challenges. Shutting down everything as you're doing is a very tough thing to give up.
We have to nurture the inner work that we do. Humans are wired to want to belong to something larger than themselves. It will kill me for saying.
Sharad, welcome to SparX. I want to start with a very important decision you made. I think somewhere in mid-career, where you had very successful professional career. You were working for multinationals. You had your entrepreneurial stint. At some point, you decided to park all of that and said, "I'm going to work full time in nation building." And it's also turned out really well. And we'll talk about all the things you've had your hands in over last 15 years. It's incredible story. But what was the thought process? आपको क्या लग रहा था? क्या सोच के कि अब हो गया commercial,
I
पैसे
think
कमाने वाला काम?
as I look back, I don't know fully actually what happened because the inner story, you don't fully understand. But I suspect it all started when I turned 40 and I started keeping a journal. And that really, really changed things for me because it allowed me to reflect much more deeply than I had done ever before. And so when I turned 45, which is in 2009, I'm 64 born. And, I asked myself a question, what do I want from life? And by then I was already quite active as an angel investor at that time. I remember ET at that time classified Rajan Anandam and me as, first and the second most active angel investors. So I had come off, having this startup which had become part of Cisco. So I was deeply embedded in the entrepreneurial world, and but I had this feeling that I should actually be helping create an ecosystem that will allow entrepreneurs to thrive. And so when it came to 2009, I decided to make this shift. I said, पैसा बनाने की जगह थोड़ा impact पे focus करते हैं. And it caused consternation, including in my family, because, you get used to
Almost संन्यास लेने से हो गया.
Yeah. So people said, ये क्या हो गया तेरे को, but I look back and I think it worked out. And to many people who are my age, who are thinking of doing it now or have been thinking of doing it in the last 5 years, I can see how difficult it is. It's so easy to do it at 45 or somewhere around that age. And it's much harder to do it 10 years later because the energy levels that you have are very, very different. So you can, commit to something which may not produce any value, for years, much more easily than you can do, let's say, in your late 50s and 60s. And I've been very, very fortunate that I was surrounded by wonderful people. Sanjay Jain was an inspiration because he did a similar plunge at that time, and many others. And our collective effort, started yielding fruit. So that kind of motivated us to keep.
So if you were to translate that into some kind of, advice for people like, and I'm in that bucket as well, Sharad, is people, let's say, in their, 40s, 50s, who had reasonable professional success in an organization or as a startup. And as you know very well, and that a lot of people have this genuine desire to give back. They want to contribute. They want to be part of this whole Viksit Bharat story and see India do well on global stage. But there are lots of challenges. And people feel while they have this desire, like shutting down everything as you're doing is a very tough thing to give up.
Yes.
So what is the mental model? How should one think about that?
I don't know the answer. Honestly, I think it is.
करना है तो करो, नहीं तो.
No, my feeling is that, what I can only say for myself, what worked for me, if I go back in time, and I have very high myopia. I've not talked about this publicly, but And as a result of that, when I was growing up, I wasn't eligible for many things, civil services, including engineering, because, I was above -8 in both my eyes. And so, but I wanted to be an engineer, so I had to find a hack to be able to do that. Now, and then I had a big accident, many of you can see me limp because of that. And so what happened was these early adversities, because of my friends and family, they helped me become stronger as an individual. And I think they left a seed in me, which was what I call the inner work seed. And that got amplified because of the journaling process. So I think ultimately, and that then reveals what may be appropriate for you, and then you kind of embrace it and go forward. But I would also say it's a slow process. You have to give yourself, nothing happens overnight. So in your case, give yourself 5 years to make a shift, because it just takes that long, to build conviction, because this is a life change, which is a very...
So, because a part of what you're saying is, whether journaling is a mechanism or some kind of inner work, so that you're going deep and seeing, basically you're asking, who am I? What I'm here for? What is going to be my impact in this world? And how do I want to contribute?
And where do I find happiness or passion, a sense of fulfillment? You have to be able to ask those questions. So I remember there's this beautiful book which influenced me. It's a book by Martin Seligman. He has written many books. My favorite version is a relatively thin book called Authentic Happiness. And in that book, he points out that there are 3 types of happiness. You buy a new car, material happiness. We know that doesn't last. But then he says, if you have 4 hours of, when you are in the zone, in a week, how can you make 4 hours 14 hours? He calls it engaged happiness. And he says to do that, you have to work on things that play to your strengths. So he includes in his book a strength finder, right? And now, of course, there are many more sophisticated tools for that. And so that's, he says, but even if you do, you can go from 4 to 40 to 40 a week. That's not good enough. He says there's a higher level of happiness, and he calls it meaningful happiness. He says humans are wired to want to belong to something larger than themselves. And that need not always be religion. So in my case, I was influenced by that. So this something larger than me became this mission that, many of us, including you, are on. And so I see myself as a servant to that mission, and that gives a deeper sense of...
this is reminding me of a similar book. This guy, David Brooks. He has this book called Second Mountain. He has many good books, but Second Mountain, exactly what you're saying. First mountain is where you achieve professional success, you prove yourself to yourself, other people, and so on. But second mountain is when you say, like, what next? something beyond me, like to higher calling, higher belonging. However you define it,
right?
And that requires obviously inner work to figure out what that is for each person.
And I think the humans are wired for something,
right? So Sharad, you said you were doing angel investing, etc. And so I'll use a startup parallel. Sometime you write an angel check, and the company becomes next Google, next Flipkart, and so on. There is this decacorn and beyond. So in the impact sector, in some ways, you had those decacorn equivalents, just multiple hits, and you were deeply involved in creation of Aadhaar, creation of UPI, lot of work on just building a deep tech ecosystem. This is quite, in some ways, strange or unlikely to, because we all want to give back. थोड़ा सा उसके बारे में बताइए कि was it right place, right time, right support? कैसे हुआ ये? This is...
एक तो I think Bangalore water has something to do.
Right.
I think, we are blessed in this city to have people who are thinking beyond themselves. I think there's a abundance mindset, much more so here than other places. तो ये जो collaboration है, लोग मिलके एक दूसरे से बात करते हैं, बहुत एक तरह से, phenomenal culture. So I think a lot of what I have ended up being part of is a result of these conversations, and I'm just one of the people involved in that. But I think what happened was कि 2-3 जो सोच थी, what that has turned out to be right. One is that ultimately value is created in some sense for a country like India. If you want to solve any problem, you have to do it. If you want to do it at scale, you have to do it the tally way. So I would invoke Bharat Goenka. I'm in long discussions with him, and I will play back the conversation that we would have. And we are here in this place, Leela. This used to be a hub for many of these conversations. And so his argument was that हमारे primary healthcare centers हैं, लाखों में हैं, right? अगर मान लो dozens में होते, hospitals हमारे 100-200 है, आपने hospitals को transform करना है, you can follow the Accenture TCS Infosys model, right? आपने उनको बुलाया और बोला भाई सब हॉस्पिटल में अच्छा IT सिस्टम लगा दो, and this is a workable. Can that model be used for 1 lakh PSCs or several lakh PSCs? Not even scalable. That's the only way to do it is through a product, and in a way that is like the tally type of a product. So one early learning that came was that if you want scale change, you have to think in terms of product. So that has helped us a lot. Then it became a question of how to create product companies. There, I would say many of us, since I lived all my life in a MNC R&D ecosystem, the importance of being able to see, for example, in AT&T Bell Labs, how important the core Bell Labs was to the product units that we have. In Yahoo, being able to see why Yahoo research was so important to the Yahoo business. This was an experiential learning. And out of that came this idea that, R&D is a very important factor. So then the question was, कौन करेगा R&D? हमने कहा हम volunteers खुद ही मिलके कर लेते हैं. So India Stack is really pre-commercial R&D being done by volunteers. फिर ये था यार वो companies तो adopt करेंगे नहीं, उनको कैसे मनाएं वो adopt करने के लिए. So the idea was कि यार इसको package कर देते हैं, इसको capsule form में डाल देते हैं so that it's easy to digest. So that is how this digital public infrastructure idea came. So this is a sequence of simple ideas, which have got added up. And some of them have worked, some of them haven't worked. So therefore it becomes...
आप थोड़ा explain करिए India Stack का idea. India Stack, why do we use this term?
Yes.
Like what all does it entail?
Understand. So पहले मैं आपको, I'll give you some numbers, right? We are 3% of global trade, India. We are 7 to 8% of the global economy. We are 17.5% of the global population.
7 to 8% in purchasing power parity. वैसे तो absolute number तो कम है.
Yeah, exactly, right? So these are the best numbers. We are 17% of the population. We are about 7 to 8% on a PPP basis, and then we are 3% of the trade. But today we are well over 50% of the digital transactions, right?
Wow, 50% globally.
Globally, right? And these are 3 types of digital transactions. The one that we all see are, of course, the commerce transactions. Somebody buying on Myntra or buying from a street vendor, they're very easy to see. But the other part, where we are roughly about 72% of the overall transactions, is DBT transactions. I think India, the social equity of India is being maintained by being able to carry the 100 million family, the poorest 100 million families, in a way that would not have been possible without DBT, right? And so that India accounts for a very large proportion of those transactions. But remember, DBT is nothing but redistribution of your and my taxes. So India has a very large proportion of the tax-paying transactions of the world. In fact, roughly about 54%. Why? Because of GST. And our GST system is very unique. It couldn't be done without the tech on the back end. Because unlike other countries, the GST settlements happen on a monthly basis. In India, they actually happen at the line item of the invoice basis. So if you were having, if you and I was growing cotton and I was selling it to you because you were turning it into yarn, and we would have done one filing each on GST every month. That is very different in India, because in India, there'll be 3 invoices. Those invoices will have multiple line items. So the transaction volume is very high. We didn't get it right the first time, but today it works. And so therefore, the GST tax buoyancy has been very, very high. And that accounts for GST, for tax-paying transactions. So India में ये क्यों हुआ इतना? वो इसलिए हुआ because the thinking that we stumbled into very early on, which is not Indian thinking, we borrowed it from the US, actually from MIT's Dean of Engineering, Vannevar Bush, was that almost all innovation is combinatorial innovation. So अगर आपको hard problem solve करनी है, तो if you have the right building blocks, then inevitably small teams will come together to build complex systems, right?
Yeah.
And so the question then is that if you want many teams to be solving that problem, to reduce the barrier of entry, you must create these building blocks that are generally available. Now, I credit that to Sanjay Jain, who was working with Lalitesh on MapMaker in Google. Now, Lalitesh will kill me for saying that, but Lalitesh is a rich man because the first company that Google acquired in its history was Lalitesh's startup, as you know, right? So he was part of Google very early on. Sanjay joined much later, but he was part of that team. And yet, he was still building his career. And we are roughly the same age. And I was trying to hire him into Yahoo at that time. And yet he decided, I want to do something for India. And therefore became the volunteer chief product officer of Aadhar, and then went on to create MOSIP as well. But coming back to this, he in 2012 created this combinatorial innovation story, saying कि एक street vendor रजनी है, उसको अगर हमने intraday loan देना है, right? तो कैसे देंगे? उसके लिए क्या building blocks चाहिए? अब ये challenge है. वो मान लीजिए रजनी 1000 रुपए का लोन लेती है, 1000 rupee loan. She normally in the current system,
ये डे लोन होगा,
डे लोन है,
ठीक है, सुबह लेके और शाम को
वापस, and she pays in the market ecosystem to the money lender, she pays 1% for it, so 10 rupees, right? Now if she keeps the loan for, let's say, 100 days, then it's a very expensive loan. So our goal was that if we can bring Rajni into the formal system, can we give her a loan in the formal system for 1 rupee a day instead of 10 rupees a day? Right? Now, at that time, she didn't have a bank account. So we needed to give her a bank account. So eKYC. She didn't have a way to sign a loan agreement. So we had to give her a way to sign a loan agreement on a non-smartphone. So therefore, eSign. We are the largest user of eSign in the world. Then we had to give her a place to store her loan agreement somewhere. So therefore, DigiLocker. Then we had to find a way for her to receive that money and return that money in the evening. अगर हम डेबिट कार्ड से करते वही 10 रुपए सुबह लेती और 10 रुपए शाम को लेती. So that would not have been possible with Visa and MasterCard. Hence UPI as a public utility for payment. And then if there are two Rajanis, one pays on time, one doesn't pay on time, the one who pays on time should get a cheaper loan. But the lenders will not give her a cheaper loan until she threatens to take her business elsewhere. Which is, by the way, we do as middle class people with our home loans all the time, right? Portability of home loans allows us to get cheaper home loans. So we needed to do that for Rajni. That resulted in account aggregator. Now this has all come to life and Oaken and everything else. But the design of this was created back in 2012. So by saying that we'll create the building blocks so that teams can actually build this out for Rajni is really what India Stack is. And that collection of building blocks, because they're loosely coupled with each other, we had to give it a name. Right. We could have called it and many other things, but many of us came from the telecom background. So हमने बोला इसको stack बोलते हैं, India Stack.
And that is also evolved into their many layers. Each layer, just like any good stack.
And they're loosely coupled, right? So you can have a UPI, you can get a UPI without having Aadhar, right? So it is not tightly connected to each other. And that is proving to be a big boon because each thing can evolve at its own pace.
And what's fascinating about this, most of this thought process that you're alluding to, from what I understand, majorly contributed by just team of volunteers.
Yes.
People who are giving their weekend time, evening time, balancing a full-time job somewhere, which is quite unique. It's like one thing I'll say, like somewhere I read in iSpeed, you said you design it to be think and do tank. Because think time में क्या होता है, ज्ञान तो हर कोई दे सकता है, was very easy part. But translating all that gyan from volunteer time to actual impact on grounded scale, is quite a story.
No, I am also humbled by this, honestly. And that I think I can now, of course, in retrospect, justify this and say, hey, we have a long history as India for creating uh, public art. For example, all our music is like this. If you create a new rag, unlike a Beethoven symphony, which will be copyrighted by Beethoven, this is not the case in our case. Our art, our sculpture, all of it has been treated as public good. So you could say we have a long tradition of doing it. Our Vedas are not written by one person; it's written by hundreds of people, right? So, so we have a long tradition. So in retrospect, I can say this is merely a manifestation of a long tradition that we have, and I think there's some truth to it. But in prospect, if you had asked me in 2009 that this commitment of the volunteer model will be there, I would have been remiss. I wouldn't have been able to.
And all this has culminated into this idea of, what you alluded to, digital public infrastructure, which is also very unique. I am not able to think of any equivalent, even in, I think, US and China. Obviously, those countries rely heavily on technology, but it's a mishmash of things controlled by different entities, as opposed to creating this common public infrastructure. When we think of infrastructure, we think of roads and rails and ports. But digital public infrastructure is quite a,
what has happened is Bangalore has a peculiar situation. Bangalore had a group of people, very well-meaning people, starting 1999, who tried to create a better infrastructure. And it was called Bangalore Action Task Force. Ravi Ravichandar was very, very actively involved. Nandan used to chair it at that time. And they had many goals, but the simplest was that you can travel signal-free from Electronic City to Velara Junction, right? Near Richmond Road. And that hasn't happened even today.
Yeah.
Right?
Physical nahi hua to hum digital banate hain.
So actually, the learning from that was that physical is very hard to change because there's so many vested interests involved, right? And digital was white space. And so therefore, it was easier to go into white space and get something done. And so this kind of a guerrilla mindset was definitely helpful.
Fair enough. And I mean, we live in a very, digital economy, digital world, and it can, there's so enormous benefits from having this digital public infrastructure. Also, huge enabler for innovation, for other startups to come in. We'll talk about that. But since you mentioned the physical infrastructure in Bangalore, that must also, I mean, be a source of disappointment, for you, right? We are doing so much world-class innovation, world-class companies, but our infrastructure is nowhere close to what we deserve.
And I think what it has done, and the way to turn this, because every adversity can be a gift. And I think in this case, what that did was it forced us to think more deeply about theory of change, right? Because we couldn't adopt the Western theory of change because that we knew doesn't work here, right? वहाँ पे ये है कि if you have a community set up, and if people get together, they can improve their local school, they can improve their local community. That is something that works in a relatively predictable fashion. Here, it was not working at all because, the system was resistant to change. Some of it because the urban bodies don't have enough money and power, and corruption, of course, is also a big factor. So therefore, you have to think or rethink the theory of change. And I think what has happened is that, over time, the Indian sophistication about or sophisticated thinking what theory of change has emerged. I think we have done a very poor job of putting it out there. And my sense is in the next 2-3 years, we need to get this theory of change out in the larger public domain so that more people can learn from it, adopt it, and deploy it. And we don't do a good job of that today, but I think it will happen over time.
Right. Which brings me to, this, actually, before going there, let's talk about UPI. So say, there are two ways to look at UPI, Sharad. One is, as you mentioned that, largest number of digital transactions in the world. I think I'm losing track of numbers, but I think trillions of dollars of transactions that happens on UPI, which is just phenomenal. Our fintech ecosystem is probably most sophisticated in the world anywhere and all of that. Having said that, entire set of UPI transactions are controlled by 2 American firms.
Yes.
Like the larger objective was and continues to be to build deep tech infrastructure here as well. So somewhere, it got also hijacked and went the other direction. So, how do you process that looking back?
Yeah. So I think the big learning from that and also from other things, uh, and I'll give another example in a short while, is that, one other assumption that we made very early on was that many of the hard problems. So let's back up for a minute. In a way, all value is created by solving problems. You'll agree with me, right? You'll also agree with me that India is rich in problems. Now, if we believe that entrepreneur's job is to solve problems, the question is, why are some of our hardest problems not being solved? And one answer to that is that we're using the wrong solution template for it, right? The Western template will not apply in many parts of India. It'll apply to India one, which is the top 100 million families, but won't apply to the second 100 million families or the third 100 million families. So if you buy that proposition, then the question is, why doesn't it happen? Now, partly you can blame the policymaker, but I think it is also the blame should go to the entrepreneur. And so very early on, an idea had taken root that fundamentally, and I would also credit this to Bharat Goenka, that we have an innovation deficit. And the deficit is because our entrepreneurs are not willing to pick up these research ideas very quickly and deploy them. So I'll give the example of UPI. So UPI was born in a way from this Rajini idea that we needed a public utility system which would allow this to happen. And the thinking in 2014 was that, in 2014, many of you will remember that we were using Skype a lot, right? And so Skype had a business model which was free for most people. And some people opted for a value-added service, and actually about 8% opted for a value-added service, and the fees that they paid for this kept it free for the remaining 92%. Now, the question that we asked ourselves is that if we can talk to our friends in the other side of the planet for free using this model, which means that you're sending big payloads of data to make that happen. Payments is very, very small payload. Why can't payment network be mostly free? Right? So that was the idea. So that allowed us to think about UPI as essentially a public utility payment system. But when it came out, we tried to get it adopted. Okay. First, obviously in Koramagala. Okay. So we went to 5 companies in Koramagala. And first is Chiller. You'll remember Chiller. I don't know if many people do. Chiller was an app that worked beautifully. If you and I had an HDFC Bank account, then on Chiller app, we could send money to each other seamlessly. Okay. It was a Kerala company that had relocated to Koramagala. So we went to them. We said, this is God sent for you, because what you do with 2 HDFC accounts, you can do it with any accounts. So they said, maybe. So they went to HDFC. They said, should we do it? What do you think HDFC said? Nay, don't waste your time with UPI. So they didn't do it.
So Chiller could have been PhonePe.
It could have been PhonePe, exactly. So therefore, they didn't adopt it. They don't exist anymore. Then we went to InstaMojo. I bet you have heard of InstaMojo. What was InstaMojo? They said you can pay on a link. Now, they would charge at one time a lot of money, 16% at one time. We, in fact, did 2 of our iSpirit volunteer meets in InstaMojo. We said, this is God sent for you. You can go from 16% to 1.6% or 0.6%. Imagine how big the market will become. And they didn't take it up. Right? Okay. Then we went to Razorpay. You have had Harshil here, so he's hopefully going to back me up. These 2 entrepreneurs, group of entrepreneurs, came from Jaipur, outside in thinking. They adopted it with full vigor. In fact, in the early days of UPI, if you did an organic search, it would be webinars of Razorpay that would come up first. And we were terrifically happy with them. But they had recently raised money from MasterCard. MasterCard said, ki ye kya kar rahe ho? It took more than a year to convince the board of Razorpay that what's good for MasterCard and what's good for Razorpay are 2 completely different things. Had Razorpay not slowed down for a year, Razorpay would have been the biggest payment player of India.
And this was from pressure from MasterCard.
From MasterCard. And these were young entrepreneurs, which, well, no, they couldn't face up to their board entirely. And I think the board let them down. I say this publicly, and I can understand the MasterCard board member taking the position, but the other board members should not have supported
And I assume
MasterCard.
the early stage company, so MasterCard couldn't have been majority, and they must say provider of capital.
Exactly. Precisely. Now comes two other Koramangala companies who had nothing, who had no legacy at all. One is JustPay. You must get Vimal Kumar, or he's my favorite, one of my favorite CEOs, because I think he's a philosopher CEO. What we need in today's time are philosopher CEOs. And he embraced this, to his credit, in a very big way. And I think that's paid off for them. And then Samir and Rahul, they had left Flipkart. You know the story better than I do. They were building a progressive apps platform. I won't mention the VC, but they got a $10 million term sheet. And so they came, and out of that 10 million, they said 1 million they'll do with other angel investors. So they came to me and said, "Tumhe bhi thoda paisa dalna chahiye." So I put this 67-page UPI architecture in front of him. I said, "Isko dekho." So this was on a Friday. Next Tuesday they came back and they said, "Very interesting. We have $10 million. We'll do both." Sure. 3 weeks later they came back and said, "No, we thought very hard about it, and we want to do only one thing as a startup, and we have decided to." And now I'm wondering, what have you have this? We have decided to do UPI. And so they made a commitment. No pressure, on their own, they took that decision. But unfortunately, that VC withdrew the term sheet because they had pivoted. And so they had to go back to your colleagues, at that time, Sachin. And it so happened, when all this was taking place, Pramod, Sanjay Jain and I, three of us, would go and pitch UPI to various places. हम IRCTC के साथ हम 2 घंटे 2.5 घंटे बैठे हुए हैं बाहर, trying to get an audience to try and tell them UPI करना चाहिए. No, there's no commercial benefit to us, but क्या करो? If you don't push, nobody is going to adopt it. And we had just returned from a beautiful meeting with Sachin. And when all this was happening, and to Sachin's credit, he decided to invest. And that investment was a minor investment compared to what went into Flipkart. But it's paid off. So I think PhonePe became an accidental foreign company. It was because our VCs didn't see light in
I just want to also update a bit of a history to make sure, So
because you were there, you were part of this.
I was there. And of course, Sachin obviously supported the transaction, but Binny was a huge champion, not only during that time, but more importantly, over next 2-3 years.
Yes.
So most of, his CEO stint, he really nurtured PhonePe. Because, PhonePe, there was initial investment, but without the, investment that have gone into, both during Benny time and beyond, PhonePe obviously wouldn't have been, right? So I think that's want to acknowledge that.
I fully agree with you. So I think all of you were there, Binny was there, Sachin was there. I think you made smart moves. At that time, you weren't a foreign company in that sense. You were doing it as an Indian player. Then circumstances resulted in that. So I think we have this continuous problem which is going down, and I'll give you a positive example of this, which is again another Koramangala company. So now Account Aggregator comes. Now Account Aggregator makes it possible for, let's say, you as a lender to get my bank account statement, my insurance details, all financial stuff, very quickly through consent. At that time, thinking was at 5 rupees a consent. The going rate for that was actually 60 rupees. Perfio's main business was that the bank would come to them and say, "Bhai, ek hame report do, iska status kya hai?" They would go and talk to the borrower. The borrower will give them their password. So they would actually enter, see the screen, what the actual numbers was, generate a report and give it to the bank. So now bank knows this is correct details. That was 60 rupees. Now at 60 rupees, we are coming and doing it at 5 rupees. Now, would it not, if you were Perfio's, Gopi and others, you would say, this is going to be a threat to my business and I am not going to allow this to happen. Our argument to them was that eventually 5 rupees will become 1 rupee But at 1 rupee, the market will grow 1000x. So if you jump in, you will capture the growth of the market. He adopted that idea. And today, Perfios is a major player in the account aggregator ecosystem.
Yeah.
I'm happy it has worked out for them.
Yeah.
Had it not worked out for them, I don't think account aggregator, if they had taken an adversarial position and fought it, they would have succeeded in fighting. Because account aggregator till today is a voluntary system. It's not pushed by the regulator. So I think the question is, when there is a pivot that is taking place in a big way, do you have entrepreneurs who adopt the pivot and then they bring it to life? Because that's the only way to bring things to life. In
a little bit, this brings out this whole idea of, skating to where the puck is going to be and not too married to, what is working to say
Precisely.
Narrow vested interest, but kind of being able to see the big picture, which Samir and Rahul did. And, as a result,
which Vimal did, they had the wherewithal to do it. And here in this case, Perfios, FinView and One Money did it. And many others did not. And so I think this is becoming more prominent in our entrepreneur ecosystem. And I think the confidence of the new founders is growing. And I love another thing about the new generation of entrepreneurs, and you represent them as well, is that, look, and I'm going to say this very bluntly, both other people that I'm going to mention have heard me say this publicly, so they won't mind it, and they're good friends. I think Sanjeev Bikhchandani, by the time he faced competition, he had already done his IPO. Right?
Yeah.
Deep Kalra, who I have enormous respect for, because he has built Make My Trip in several innings, right? Foreign travel, then domestic airline travel, and now packaged travel. He faced competition from Expedia a year before his IPO. So it's, he had built muscle.
Yeah.
I think in the case of what you did with e-commerce, Myntra and Flipkart, you faced serious competition from Amazon in 5th year or so. And that is much tougher because your muscles are not fully built at that time. And Samir and Rahul faced their competition from Google Pay in the very first year of their existence. So this spike that you need to take on a Goliath in year 1 versus year 5 versus near your IPO is completely different. And I'm very optimistic about our ecosystem, because the spunk that you need to take on a Goliath very early in the game is coming. And I think, this is a result of all the
why the
stuff
history
that is
there is obviously, inspiring, and this framing is very helpful. But I mean, I'm not thinking from AI lens. Abhi the Goliath here is Sam Altman in OpenAI.
Right.
और वो इतना आगे हैं, इतना डीपली इन्वेस्टेड है कि अभी तो वो मतलब आपका एनालिसिस को फर्दर लेके वो मतलब लोगों कंसीव करने की हिम्मत नहीं होती कि इनसे कैसे कॉम्पीट करेंगे.
So I think let's back up here for a minute. So I think the reason we have this financial inclusion success was that the battle was not at the company level. The battle was at the playground level. Let me see if I can explain this very simply. Clearly, Nestle and Amul are battling with each other in the milk space. Is that true?
Yeah.
But the playgrounds that they have, in which case that they operate in, the networks that they have, the way they deal with milk producers is completely different. So the question I think that comes up is that if you are going to have the same type of template, then you will not win. If you can change the template, the rules of the game, then your odds of success can go up. This is why iPhone was able to defeat Nokia, because they changed the rules of the game, and turned it was a iPhone ecosystem winning over the Nokia ecosystem. Right?
Yeah.
I think we have to therefore think in the same way for AI. The AI ecosystem that we create in India has to be different than the AI ecosystem that exists in the US. Partly because in the US, most of the use cases that will be corporate use cases. In India, health, education, there are many other use cases that will come. For those use cases, let's say health as an example, we can create a different type of a template for AI,
Yeah.
then would be the case in the
Actually,
US, and that would then throw up players who would be able to take this forward.
So AI is obviously a very, very pertinent topic. मैं उसके वापस आता हूँ. उससे पहले ना, when I was just reading about Sharad, your work and some of the things you publicly shared, one thing caught my attention. You said, India में, if we really don't get our deep tech product nation story right, we risk becoming trade colony of China and tech colony of US. And it really hit home because I've been thinking about these topics. I think, this fear is real, and we have seen it, play out. Even, despite all the success of UPI, the fact is it is owned by foreign companies, and they have, access to all the data. They know exactly what's happening in transaction. And one can argue, if I'm able to analyze every Rajni's transaction in the country, I know exactly a person country log kya khareed rahe hain, kya soch rahe hain, all of that whole dynamics is open book for these companies. And this fear of potentially being, trade colony of China and tech colony of US, what prompted you first of all to, arrive at this assessment? And we'll obviously talk about, we'll have an optimistic outlook, and that's why you are giving your life to solve this. So, it's not...
No, I'm one of the many people involved. But I think, look, what happened is that, this is my second stint in Bangalore. I came here in Bangalore 93 to 97 to set up AT&T as R&D. And so I lived all my life, in the beginning part of my life, essentially working for MNC R&D setup, right? Like many others. And Bangalore became a big hub. So I my MNC R&D footprint that is there in Bangalore, which is 80% of the MNC R&D footprint of India. I'm a card-carrying member because back in early 90s, I was involved as AT&T. And then when I came back to India in 2004, I got pulled by Veritas to fix their center in Pune. And then I spent some time in Yahoo, in emerging markets, of which India was an important place. So I'm a card-carrying member there. What had happened was that many people inside this R&D system had angst कि यार हम अपनी company को तो rich बना रहे हैं, पर हम India के लिए कुछ नहीं कर रहे. There was no value accruing to India at all. And so ये समझ आया उस angst से कि a lot of this value that is created is R&D driven. I'll give you an example. Today, the market cap of GLP-1 company Novo Nordisk is more than the GDP of Denmark.
Incredible.
Right? But why is that the case? They have only 77,000 people. Denmark is 6 million people. Why is it? Because it's all to do with R&D. Right? At one time, Nokia was a significant part of Finland's, economy. Now, we know from these examples that wealth creation is not about number of people. Today, wealth creation is coming from R&D. So if you are a small country, then you can only focus on wealth creation through R&D. In India, the problem with wealth creation of R&D is that it doesn't employ enough people. Right? So 77,000 people, what will the remaining 6 million people or 5 million people do? Right? So you also need another type of economy, which is providing jobs. So I think we need job economy and we need a wealth economy. And I think many of us came from the wealth economy, not the job economy. And so therefore the realization dawned very early that since India is a big country, we need to be ambidextrous.
Right.
We need to have both a job economy, which is, let's say, the Ola economy, and a wealth economy, which is the Novo Nordisk. So the question is, how do we get both? And that's the big insight there, was that on the back end, they have very different innovation ecosystems.
And when you think wealth economy now, does it increasingly mean R&D economy?
Yeah, R&D economy, right? So the question for us was that if you need a wealth economy, and the wealth is to solve problems at scale, you need R&D. I think the biggest thing that happened, I think, with this volunteer model is that we all saw ourselves as essentially researchers coming together to do pre-commercial research for free. Then, of course, was how to convince companies to adopt it. And then DPI was packaging that you did to make that happen. But the idea has been that if you really want to solve hard problems, using building blocks that exist are not enough. You need to create new building blocks, and these new building blocks come from R&D. They don't come from engineering. They come from research. And that has to be done as well. So you need engineering people, product people, but you also need research. So combinatorial innovation. I'll give another example. I'm a big fan of Aether, right? Aether, however, is combinatorial innovation of drivetrain, battery chemistry, and controller. But all three are not their own. They're coming from others. Now, can they combine them in a more interesting way than their competitors? And they are doing that. That is combinatorial innovation. But in combinatorial innovation, there's no moat. Supposing they come up with a new feature, everybody will copy it, which is what happens. iPhone would come up with a new feature and my Pixel copies it, right? And so the moat comes from taking one of the building blocks and owning it. Now that ownership can be either at the country level or it can be at the company level. But that then creates distinctive value, that creates a moat, that allows the wealth creation to remain either inside the country or inside the company. And we are not doing enough of that as we go forward, and therefore that's a problem that needs to be solved as we.
As I understand this is this requires incredible ecosystem creation at many different levels, and probably going to be a generational effort.
Yes.
If you ask a very sobering question, which is a leading R&D oriented company out of India, which is even a top 10 in the world in their respective category? Maybe there is some that I'm not aware of, but not many, I think is the answer.
Yeah, I think so. See, and the reason for that, and I want to be charitable to the companies that are not like that, is that actually India is very good at one type of innovation, which is process innovation. I am a big fan of Indigo. They run a fairly large airline well, right? I remember, back in time, what you were involved with. I've never, as you can see, I'm not into fashion thing, but I was definitely a very early consumer of Flipkart. And I remember, उस ज़माने में you would have Nokia phones and you would have interchangeable battery. तो मैं जहाँ रहता हूँ वहाँ 150 फीट दूरी एक संगीता की दुकान थी जो उससे बैटरी जाके खरीदी थी. So I remember ordering the battery on Flipkart because Flipkart was such a reliable way to get it. And in the evening, we used to go for a walk. And then I remember everybody was teasing me, saying, "Kitna lazy hai? वहाँ पे जाके नहीं कर सकता." But that process innovation to reliably deliver something is amazing. We've done that for healthcare. Narayan Hridyalaya, you've had Devi Shetty on your podcast. We've done that in Jio and Airtel, right? So the
ultimate culmination is 10-minute delivery.
Exactly. Scale, right? And now imagine what is happening. So we as a country have become very good at process innovation, and we can create world-class companies in that area. And that is not something to laugh about. This is very few countries have that capability. But that doesn't need deep researchers to make that happen. That needs Six Sigma people, who know, Six Sigma, Malcolm Baldrige, Deming, there's a different body of knowledge that is there. But what we now need is product innovation. Product innovation is combinatorial because that brings the product to life. But behind combinatorial innovation is this building block innovation. Now that is what we have to master. For that, the challenge that we have, which these companies have, which also the country has, to bring this innovation ecosystem to life, there are two challenges. One is the relationship between an MBA and a techie and a researcher. अरे वो researcher is a different animal than MBA. उसको MBA के नीचे रख दो, वो बेचारा मर जाएगा. Right? You can do the reverse and it might survive, or you can have them as peers. You have to change the culture of the company to manage that. The second is, you can't win this battle of ecosystems. If the battle of AI ecosystem is got to be fought by India, then you can't win this without having more technocrats involved in building that ecosystem. Right? You can't have a system where Chinese use technocrats to build the ecosystem, The Americans use technocrats to build an ecosystem. We use bureaucrats to build a system. It's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
So we have to adjust the power equations between researchers and MBAs,
Yeah.
which people are very reluctant to do because the companies are run by MBAs, right? And between bureaucrats and technocrats, which the bureaucrats are loath to do because they run the policy making entirely today.
Yeah.
Although that is changing, but until we embrace these fundamental changes, we won't be able to succeed over time. So this is our challenge.
What's your take on this? Is on the policy making side. See, if something I wonder. They say when pandemic happened, within first few months, country took very dramatic calls. And same for demonetization, Operation Sindoor. We have the ability to take big calls. Why is this deep tech not considered key? This is, I know, and this is not to take credit away. I know a lot of effort is being done by government, but it seems like, progressive, incremental,
Yes.
or hoga over a period of time versus time out. This is a serious crisis. Today, even if I don't know, even Maldives attacks us, we'll have a big, war room set up the same day. Why are we not doing deep tech war room?
It is true for every democracy, first of all. So I'll give a story of this. So, remember I mentioned Vannevar Bush. वो 1945 में, जुलाई 45 में, उसने एक बहुत पावरफुल मेमो लिखा. उसका नाम है साइंस द एंडलेस फ्रंटियर. तो उसने लिखा कि अगर हम वर्ल्ड में compete करना चाहते हैं, तो हमें एक साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी बेस्ड इकोनॉमी बनानी पड़ेगी. आई वोंट गो इनटू डिटेल्स, बट इट्स अ मेमो वर्थ रीडिंग एंड ही आउटलाइन मेनी थिंग्स टू बी डन. अब कुछ तो हुई, बट मेजॉरिटी नहीं हुई. वो बातें हुई, पर हुआ कुछ नहीं. Although the memo was official policy in July 1946. So the US as a country decided to do that. फिर क्या हुआ? 4th October 1957 में वो सोवियट्स ने स्पुतनिक भेज दिया. तो अगर आप इंडिया में जाके किसी कॉलेज में बोले वो स्पुतनिक, और जैसे हम इंडिया में स्पुतनिक बोलते हैं, स्पुतनिक का क्या सिग्निफिकेंस है, वो इंडियन इंजीनियरिंग कॉलेज स्टूडेंट बोलेगा इट इज इनोवेशन, इट वाज द फर्स्ट थिंग दैट वेंट. आप अमेरिका में जाके आप पूछिए वो क्या बोलते हैं. वो बोलते हैं वी हैव लॉस्ट द बैटल, ऑल हैंड्स ऑन डेक, बचाओ किसी तरह, मरने वाले हैं, राइट. एंड सो देयरफॉर इन 1 year they made many changes. I'll only highlight 3. By February of 1958, they made DARPA. वो DARPA क्यों नहीं बना था इतने सालों? 46 में DARPA was conceived, 58 तक क्यों नहीं बना? वो 12 साल लड़ाई चल रही थी कि DARPA में जो प्रोग्राम ऑफिसर्स होंगे, अभी 140 है, whether they will be military officers or whether they'll be bureaucrats or they'll be researchers drawn from the research ecosystem. वो डिसाइड ही नहीं हो पा रहा था. एंड बट ये हुआ तो उन्होंने बोला चलो यार ये तो रिसर्चर से ही लगाएंगे. सो DARPA remains successful because of that decision that happened in a crisis. Second, they created NASA in July 1946, and then they created this National Defense Education Act, which made it free essentially for colleges to offer scholarship to foreign STEM graduate and PhD students. So that change happened because of a crisis. Because in a democracy, everybody has a voice, and then you can't able to make that happen. I believe the Sputnik moment for India has arrived.
Which one? I mean, it's there. It's a.
हमारे President Trump ने कर दिया.
Fair, okay.
Right? आप मुझे कोई ढूंढ के दिखाओ जो बोले, which you mentioned, कि we should not worry about being a trade colony of China and a tech colony of the US. Can you find anybody in the system, including a policymaker, who can deny this is a real problem?
पर अभी 2-3 मिनट डील हो जाएगी, फिर लाइफ विल बैक इज BAU, फिर भूल जाएंगे इसको.
नहीं होगी डील. मैं बताता हूँ क्यों. Because the US is also in a panic mode because of China, and they are, because of this panic mode, वो हमें तो अच्छा ट्रीट करे. वो तो पहले अपने भाई बंधु कैनेडियंस और उनको, because they are openly saying that we are in a crisis and we need everybody to now help save us, because if you don't save us, you won't survive. So I think this is not a temporary problem, and I don't think it will go away. I don't think the US thinking is going to change, at least for the next 3 years. And this is our time, therefore,
right,
to treat it like something Amitabh Khan said very nicely in one of his tweets, this is a generational crisis that should not go waste.
I agree
And
wholeheartedly.
this is really what we must do, and use the crisis like we did in COVID to make something.
So effort is being made, I think, and we'll touch upon a few different areas. But starting with the look, this is a game where obviously the government need to lead from the front foot, and there is a huge role. I think the private sector and the research ecosystem will come to that.
Right.
And the government is making moves. The RDI fund is probably
Yes.
boldest effort yet. I think it still need to be action and translated into actual investment on ground and so on. From your vantage point, do you think what else need to happen the policy making?
I think that crisis thinking should be amplified.
Yeah.
Sometimes so for me, my personal journey has been to go from an internal change agent to a external societal change agent. And in a company change, there is this famous Harvard professor, John Cotter, who has, वो बोलता है यार कंपनी में चेंज करना है ना, तो even if there's no crisis, you create a crisis, because without that it will not happen, right?
Actually, मैं उसमें आपको इंटरप्ट करके बोलना चाहता हूँ कि मेरी एंटरप्रेन्योर जर्नी में आई ऑब्जर्व एग्जैक्टली सेम थिंग. जब क्राइसिस अपने आप नेचुरली आ जाता है तो एकदम खतरनाक काम होता है. लाइक एज द से लाइक डेकेड्स हैपन, वीक्स टाइप का माइंडसेट आ जाता है. और फिर कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी जब स्टेबल टाइम चल रहा होता है, एंड आई कीप थिंकिंग यार मैं क्राइसिस कैसे क्रिएट करूँ, और बहुत मुश्किल है वो आर्टिफिशियली क्रिएट करना, और नहीं हो पाता है.
तो हमारे पॉलिटिकल लीडर्स को क्राइसिस क्रिएट करना पड़े, राइट? बिकॉज ये हम we can help them do that, but ultimately our system is run by the political leaders, and I think they have to create a sense of crisis. What do we need? Not only a crisis to embrace the new way of thinking that we need, but also to do it right the first time. हमारा ये है कि हम थोड़ा, because of jugaad thinking, and I think many people like Professor Rishi Krishnan, argue that jugaad thinking is a liability for structural change. It is an asset for bringing the right product to the market. But if you want structural change, it's a liability. And I fully agree with him on that. Because what tends to happen is that structural change, we don't pay enough attention to get it right the first time, right? In a short amount of time. So what happens is, हमने PPP ports and airports में लगाया, अब अच्छा चल रहा है. But that is because the first innings failed. फिर वो second innings में यार जो लोग पहले ही बोल रहे थे, वो पहले नहीं किया, उसको dilute करके half-heartedly किया, वो चला नहीं, फिर जाके सारा काम किया. This is what happened in telecom deregulation in mid-90s. पहला वाला version नहीं चला, दूसरा वाला version अब चल रहा है. तो ये जो हमें, we have to learn to do it right the first time. In the case of COVID and other areas, we managed to do it right the first time because the crisis was so significant that the thinking was, gosh, we can't mess up this vaccination of 1 billion people this year. इस साल में नहीं किया तो, the moment we would lose the battle. And so we have to bring that thinking, because in India, because of all this disruption that happened because of COVID, the supply chain disruption that is happening because of geopolitics, will all settle down in 5 years. And then if we want to assert ourselves, will become very, very hard. Whether it's semiconductors or whichever area, power electronics, EVs, whatever we are talking about. So we have to do it right the first time. So RDI fund has to get its act together the first time. Traditional wave is half-hearted implementation. It will not go right the first time. Then conviction will develop, and then you will do it right the second time, which will be 4 or 5 years later. We don't have the luxury to do that. And so therefore the sense of crisis.
One of my hope is, while I think RDI fund, if implemented right, will obviously catalyze the ecosystem. At some point, I think, small investments will start to happen. But for me, the proof of pudding will be that some companies are able to tap into that to raise 50 million, 100 million, even, 500 million. After, obviously proving, traction on ground and building some unique IP and so on. That will be real proof of the pudding, because we need ultimately, well-funded company with long runway and in a very competitive environment. You're competing with you're able to demonstrate, I had Pratish from Sarvam also here. And, Sarvam is, trying to fight in some ways lonely battle But I feel like, they are going to battle with, this is knives versus, fighter jets. So it's not a level playing field, and we can't have, we should have come like Sarvam, like really empowered back to the hilt. Like if you're doing Mistral versus Sarvam, right? Different degrees of, both India and AI and France are on this whole AI summit thing, but Mistral is a different plane.
Absolutely. So, दो चीजें, and I think first, uh, and our common friend Sanjay Naik says this beautifully, that there are two classes of fight. One where you are a late entrant into the game, like UPI was a late entrant to a payment system which was dominated by Alipay, WeChat Pay, Visa and MasterCard. Or you are a relatively early entrant into the game. Let's say account aggregator, there was no major disruption that was, it was filling a white space at that time. So now the nature of the game is different. So the problem that Sarvam has, just to be more empathetic to Sarvam, is that remember what Dubai was able to do because of Sheikh Omar Sultan. They started their Falcon effort much earlier. And since all LLMs are essentially using public web data, scraping it and building it, today Falcon is a significant LLM, and especially in Global South, it has significant traction because they got into this early and they said, "Bhai, wo jo kar rahe hain, wohi hum karenge." And so they at least they are in that game. Same is the case with Mistral, right? So Sarvam is coming very late in the game. By the way, this whole GPT thing took off with 3.5. 3.5 means they have been at it for a long time, right? And by the time they came out with 3.5, Falcon was there because they had been also working for many years. So when you come so late in the game, copying your competitors is not a recipe for success, right? So the question that we have to ask is, what does Sarvam or others do? Now, the argument that I give to Vivek, and Vivek has been one of our, we have only had 4 volunteer heroes in iSpirit, where Vivek is one of them. And if I remember right, he's the first one of the volunteer heroes. Then, of course, we have an entrepreneur. I want to acknowledge him, which is Amit Ranjan, who built SlideShare, and once he finished with SlideShare, he decided to become a full-time volunteer. DigiLocker is a result of what he did. And UPI saw Nikhil Kumar, who then later went on to do Sedu and is still, in post their acquisition, still there with PayU. And so, but the point is that Vivek, however, has to do something out of the box. What can be out of the box? The out of the box is that if you are dealing with public data, you are too late in the game. Can you make things happen with private data sets that nobody has? And I think they're trying to do that, as Pratyush would have. I've not watched the podcast, but I'm sure he talked about it. But in many areas, particularly health, there is a completely different paradigm for data. Because even a corporate entity that might share with Sarvam on a trusted arrangement basis, कि मैं आपको customer support data दे देता हूँ, आप मेरे को return में एक better conversational, AI system दीजिए, जो मेरे situation में apply करे. That requires some type of tech infrastructure, but that tech infrastructure is not very different. It's an incremental difference. But when you go to Denmark or you go to France, where they're sitting on, one of the reasons Denmark is so good is because they started using health data back in the 70s, right? That data cannot be made available to the startup. There, the startup comes to a secure environment where the data lives. The model comes to data, the data doesn't go to the model. This kind of a system is not what OpenAI or for that matter, the current LLM players do, because wo history tha कि data will come to me. This is a history of my model will go to the data. If we can embrace that as a place where we will win, then there is a chance, because we are alongside everybody right in the beginning of that revolution.
But still, do you
That requires different use cases, different thinking for all that ecosystem. to
And
come.
will this whole, let's assume we are able to make all the right moves. Having a thriving research ecosystem and world-class product, by definition, long-term game. We can't look forward to कि अगले साल सक्सेस क्या होगा, 2 साल में, 3 साल में. मतलब अगर आज काम ठीक करेंगे तो शायद 2030 में पहले सीड्स दिखना शुरू होंगे.
Absolutely.
बट वो पेशेंस पूरे सेटअप में बहुत मुश्किल होता है टू बी एबल टू लाइक रियली बिल्ड समथिंग कि अभी आप जब डैम बनाते हैं वो 10 साल तक 1 वाट इलेक्ट्रिसिटी नहीं आती है, राइट. बट जब आना शुरू होती है तो मतलब इट गिव्स इलेक्ट्रिसिटी फॉर फ्री फॉर फॉरएवर. तो सेम थिंग इट्स वेरी हार्ड टू bootstrap the ecosystem.
So therefore, the way to think, at least for many of us in iSpirit, has been that there are the market players only will have a 5-year mindset, if at all. क्योंकि उनको VCs ने किया, VCs को 10 साल में पैसा वापस करना है. वो 2-3 साल तो हो ही गए जब तक उन्होंने पैसा डाला, फिर उनको टेंशन है कि मेरे को वापस मिलेगा कि नहीं. So the policy makers in a democracy can have a 10-year mindset. Can they have a 20-year mindset? No, because political process, policymakers are ultimately driven by politicians.
China बोलते हैं 100-year mindset
because उनका democracy नहीं है ना, उनका that is the thing. So then you need to create in a democracy institutions that will have a 10, 15, 20-year mindset. Now that inevitably end up being research institutions, right? Because researchers, TIFR has a 20-year mindset, right? So in every democracy, the institutions that have a longer mindset are either universities, because universities have a funding model के इस क्लास में से 300 लोग थे, कौन से 3 हैं जो आके मुझे $300 million देंगे 30 साल later. So they keep in touch with those 300 people, looking for those 3 people who will make big. So they have a long kind of a mindset, and then that applies to their work as well. So universities can do that, research labs can do that. In India, the universities are not set up like that. And in India, the old research labs are not set up like that. So the obligation for you and I to create a new class of institutions that will have a 20, 30-year mindset becomes necessary, right? And so those kind of think tanks are needed to make that happen. And if you do that, then you can create this cascade, right? Which is that you'll have all types of players in the market who are operating in a playground that can be brought together. The advantage China has, as you pointed out, that they can actually get, they also have a problem with marketplace. The marketplace have a 5-year mindset, but their policymakers have a 20, 30-year mindset. Right? And this used to be true for Korea because it was a single party run system. It used to be true for Taiwan. It used to be true for Japan. And therefore, they didn't build the institutions that were needed in a real democracy. And now, as the parties begin to change, all of these countries are starting to struggle. Japan is not a leader in any of the new emerging areas that we are talking about. Right? Because now that single party system is collapsed. So therefore, the policymakers are not able to take a 20-year view. So now you need somebody else, some other system that will take a 20-year view.
Right.
So that they haven't done a good job. In India, if we can solve this problem, then it will sort itself out as well.
What will change things for the broader established corporates, their setup? Because, one of the criticism of the very profitable companies is their investment R&D either too small or going back to process improvement, eking out that extra 10 basis point of profitability, which, impacts the quarterly statement and so on. Uska nudge kahan se aayega? How will that change? Because startup, agar aaj आप startup चालू करते हैं तो 10 साल बाद maybe that will be world class. अगले 5 साल में जितना, there has to be existing companies.
Right. So I am cautiously optimistic. So I will give an example. So मेरा ये mindset change that is needed in the big companies. And this is a big mindset change that we need. Last financial year, ending March, we for the first time as a country had 5 companies that made $10 billion profit. Okay. Now, just to put this in perspective for our listeners, GE made $7.8 billion profit. So $10 billion profit by any yardstick is a very large number, right? And who are those 5? They're the Ambani, Adani, Tatas, all of them put together, and HDFC Bank and SBI. Their combined R&D spend is 0.1%. Right? By any yardstick, it should be 2.1%. Right?
As Elon Musk says, let that sink in.
Right? अब आप उनको 21 times कैसे कराओगे? बड़ा मुश्किल है. Mindset change नहीं होगा तो नहीं होगा. So the question to ask is कि mindset change हो सकता है कि नहीं? Right? मेरा lived experience है कि इसी, on 16th of August 2017, UPI had finished in 2016, it was launched. So we started working on account aggregator. We launched it in this hotel on 16th August 2017. तो उस वक्त enough part of India stack had come to life. तो we realized कि अब ये banks को mindset change कराना है. कैसे करें? तो हमने 4 banks को पकड़ा. सिर्फ 4. SBI and Bank of Baroda and 2 other banks, Axis Bank and IDFC Bank. Amazing leaders. उनको हमने बोला कि भाई हम आपके साथ काम करेंगे. We want you to have an orbit shift in your thinking, embrace India stack, become an example. Because if you can become example, then 14 other banks will become, and 14 become 140 banks. ऐसा सोच थी. और हम volunteers हैं, हमारे पास ज़्यादा energy तो है नहीं to do many together. तो हम उनके साथ मिलना शुरू किया. It's called FTLC. Venki Hariharan, one of our volunteers, got that program going. And it took 2-3 years, but it was amazingly successful. And I encourage people to read Arundhati Bhattacharya's book that she wrote. She was the CMD of State Bank of India. And to her credit, she embraced it in a big way. So did all the other 3. My feeling is that if you approach our senior leaders with this idea of mindset change, because they're sharp people, they could be where they are.
Correct.
If you explain to them that this is the pivot that they need to make and be there to handhold without any self-interest, I think they will take it up. I'm cautiously optimistic in this 5 that actually 4 of the 5 will succeed. And, Shashi of HDFC, Anjani, unbelievable willingness to embrace, although they're only bankers. But I think their willingness to go forward is enormous. But I think, I love what Mukesh Bhai says. He says, I'm not an MBA. मैं तो engineer हूँ. And his self-image is that, what he knows about the petrochemical value chain, is something that will take somebody else 20 years to learn. So to learn something about the new value chain, he has the humility to say, I am in a learning mode. I am willing to sit down and learn. So I think something will change. I think Adani's way, I'm really, really impressed with one of the 4 new young people, Sagar Adani. Tremendously open-minded, humble, will make that change. But you work with Chandra, you will agree with me. I think there is a possibility that will change. But they will become essentially motherships for startups. They'll not, the real action will come from the Tejas networks and the Galaxy Eyes. You are an investor in many of the space startups. It'll come from space startups. And, the other day we were in a meeting with, that was being chaired by Abhay Karandikar, right? The DST secretary. He says this beautifully. It'll be a 550 model. There'll be 50 deep tech startups. There'll be 5 big companies. And I think we have to embrace this, but join them in a way that, that these big companies play the role that Cisco played, or they are acquirers of very good innovation, and therefore they provide a virtuous cycle for the ecosystem to thrive.
And as one of the backbone of this ecosystem will be thriving research ecosystem.
Yes,
which requires big role from academia. If you look at Stanford, MIT, Berkeley, Caltech, right? In UK, Cambridge, and so on. China is now, few of the Chinese universities at the forefront of really innovation, driving a lot of patents and so on. So, how can that get activated? It is more of a reform issue, funding issue,
and a culture issue. So look, today, I am 100% sure you in your previous avatar must have hired product managers who returned back from the US, right? You must have hired engineering managers who returned back from the US. So we can bring high quality people.
And I can say many of them want to come back. I'm in touch
and
with
for variety of people, and they're landing spots for them. And they end up staying here because, say, on balance, it works out great for me, right? Is that not true?
That's right.
Today, if you want to get a high quality researcher, where do you bring that person?
Yeah.
If you put them even in ISC, there's so many limitations of what you can pay them, how they will operate, because the legacy has come in, and therefore they can't settle in anymore, right? So we have a challenge of being able to we can bring early career researchers back. Somebody has finished his PhD. We've had, for example, one of the best funded startups, a very quiet AI startup, is run by Professor Himanshu Tyagi of ISC, right? But he is a young guy who came and said, okay, theek hai, main yahin se start karta hu. But if you want to bring a mid-career researcher back, which is what we need, because they know how to build research centers, they can be principal investigators of these new research centers in a way that an early researcher cannot do. We don't have a place to bring them back. And so therefore, we have to create a new class of research institutions that actually will host them. And they build their teams as we go forward. You and I, we've been calling it FROs, focused research organizations, that necessarily has to be partly public or mostly publicly funded. And I think that this RDI fund will help us do that, because that is one of the purposes of that. And if we are able to do that, then I think things will go. So there are two of them being set up. And if we can really make them work in India, then that gives the template for many other people to follow. So I think we need to focus over the next 5-10 years, mid-career researchers coming back and setting up high-quality research centers inside our research ecosystem, so that these deep tech startups can really think out of the box. The Sarvams, the Galaxy Eyes, or whoever that we are talking about, there's so many of them. And that can go and make a difference. And then the policymakers have a role to play, because like if you plant a tree on a farm, you have to provide some protection till the sapling grows up. So we have to provide some infant industry protection. I think we have to learn how to do it in a smart way. That is necessary. There are a lot of demand aggregation that we know. So the bunch of things that we need to do to build these playgrounds that will create the winners that we are talking about.
So on the kind of final note, Sharad, what will be your kind of since you are at a core very much of an ecosystem person, and you have seen from upfront, from a fledgling of idea to driving trillions of dollars of transactions, how the whole ecosystem can come together. What will be your call to action to whether it's policymakers, industrialists, engineers, researchers? Kya karna chahiye? What's your appeal to the country as a whole?
See, you organized a fabulous meeting here with David Gross and others recently. And so I'll pick something from there and draw a parallel. We know that at the bottom there's string theory. An approximation that kind of feeds into quantum, which feeds into classical physics. Classical physics feeds into all these chemical reactions that take place, that at some point magically life happens and biology comes in. And somewhere from all of that, consciousness comes in, right? Now, the fact is there's 6 layers. We understand some layers well and some layers very poorly, but they're all deeply connected with each other. Is that true?
That's right.
Now, if anybody can understand the body of knowledge at each layer, I think it is India. Because intuitively, auto rickshaw driver here knows how to think at the bhajan level and how that is different from thinking at the Gita level and the Veda level, right? each layer has its own. If you want a successful bhajan, there is body of knowledge of making a successful bhajan, right? Just knowing Gita is not going to make you a good bhajan singer. So you need body of knowledge at every layer. I think we are at a point where we have to create these 6 layers. At the top, the consciousness equivalent is our socio-political system, our democracy and stuff like that. We have reformed to there, but by and large, in the world, it works. When it comes to the lower layer below that, which is the economy, we have to learn that there is a jobs economy and there is a wealth economy. And we cannot ignore either of them to be viable as a country. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Then if we come to the wealth economy, then we have to realize that this needs product innovation, product thinking. Without that, there'll be no wealth economy. Service economy is not going to create this. Jio and Airtel will not create wealth in India. But the people who sell to Jio and Airtel, the Tejas networks and the network equipment companies, they can create wealth in India. So we need that. That's the third layer. That layer, which is the product layer, has a whole ecosystem, playground. How do we focus on N+1, not the current thing that we were talking about? How do we make sure then that there is a research ecosystem to power it as we go forward? So I think, if you go back in time, you have a research kind of infrastructure. Then you have a regulatory infrastructure, policymaker infrastructure. On top of that, you have the product kind of a market infrastructure. Market players are doing it. On top of that, you have to think about the economy, wealth creation economy, and how do you encourage that so that it has a social compact that will work, which we haven't done as a country, and that will feed into all of this. So I think we have a ton of learning to do. And what is going to force us to learn about all of this is the crisis that is there. And I really hope that we seize this moment of crisis to build this new India that we need as we go forward.
Amazing. I'll just add to that, right? Anyone who believes in and wants to participate in this dream of Viksit Bharat, I think can choose to play in any of those 6 layers you've articulated and volunteer your time, your money, your
do it for whatever money, do it for a personal, for your build your career there, be an entrepreneur in this. Absolutely. There's so many ways you can do it.
So clearly, there's a crisis, but in every crisis, as you say, there is a massive opportunity, and hopefully this is where, make the switch. And next 10, 20 years, the stories will celebrate, will be a lot more research, deep tech, product oriented, and that'll be,
And I underline this 10, 20 years because it is a journey of 10, 20 years. It's not going to happen overnight.
Right. Thanks, Sharad. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for sharing your inputs and for everything you've done, for the country. It's very inspiring.
Thank you and we are all partners in crime here. So, you've been minimizing your own role in this, but I'm really grateful for our partnership, especially on this new thing that we are all working on to bring this new thing.
No, absolutely. A lot to do. We'll be at it. Thanks. At SparX, we aim to bring to you stories of exponential impact. We share in-depth analysis of what goes behind success stories. If you find our conversations interesting, you can join us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can also listen to SparX on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or any other audio platform of your choice. If you have any suggestions on who we should invite or what topics we need to cover, just let us know in the comments. We are always listening, looking for ways to improve, and keep getting better as we go along.